15. Noise. St. Paisios of the Holy Mountain vehemently opposed the noise that prevails everywhere nowadays. He said, quote, "The restless secular spirit of our times, with its supposed civilization, has unfortunately destroyed even the sacred sites of the desert that bring so much peace and sanctification to souls. Secularization is the greatest enemy of the monk, even greater than the devil. Even there, on the holy mountain, you cannot find a quiet spot. Everywhere you go, they're opening up forced roads. Cars are everywhere. Even the most remote and quiet places can now be reached by car. I wonder what these people are seeking in the wilderness." When a gentle wind from the desert stirred the reeds, Arsenios the Great would say, "What sound is this? Is it an earthquake?" I wonder what the Holy Fathers would have said if they'd seen and heard what is happening today. I remember in our monastery we used to carry water in containers from a spring and would slowly lift it to the third floor with a windlass. Now they bring the water up with an engine and you hear its constant noise. But Yerunda, a nun, objected. "These machines, they make our lives easier." "Oh, there are too many of these devices around. This constant buzzing removes us from the real monastic way of life. Why then do you have a sign outside that says, 'Hesychasterion'? A footnote, many of the small monasteries in Greece are called Hesychasterion, which literally means a place of hesyche, a place of quiet. Why do you not write buzzing place or place of unrest? What is the use of the monastery if there's no peace and tranquility? When the monk makes use of all these noisy devices, he does away with the preconditions for prayer and the monastic way of life. For this reason, we should avoid using noisy devices as much as possible. That which people today consider to be conveniences do not actually help the monk achieve his goal. A monk cannot find in such a noisy environment what he is set out to find by becoming a monk. To be tranquil is very important. Even if one is not actually praying, tranquility will put him in a state of prayer. This is why it is good for monasteries to be located in isolated areas away from the rest of the world, away from archaeological sites, worldly noises, and great numbers of people. External hesychia, external tranquility, living away from the world, along with discerning asceticism and unceasing prayer, will soon bring about the inner tranquility, the peace of the soul, which is an essential precondition for the more refined and more profound prayer of the heart. End of quote, St. Paisios, With Pain and Love for Contemporary Man, pages 190 to 194. To continue. Similarly, whenever Elder Ephraim heard the fathers using a gas-powered blower, he wanted them to stop because such tools ruin the monastery's peace and quiet. He frequently added that such noisy tools are inappropriate for use in a monastery. Likewise, he was so disturbed by the noise made by the air conditioning units outside the buildings and by the refrigeration unit outside the refrigeration building that he asked us if we could turn them off before we had to walk by them. He even expressed his displeasure with the relatively quiet, low rumbling sound of the air handler that ventilated the ground level story of the house where we lived. And like St. Silouan the Athonite, he was bothered even by the ticking of a clock in his cell. For more on that, see the Life of St. Silouan the Athonite, page 161. To continue. Despite the drawbacks of noise, St. Paisios added that we can counteract the negative effect of noise through a proper inner stance. Quote again from With Pain and Love for Contemporary Man. Since, unfortunately, modern man uses noisy devices even for small things, it is important, if we ever find ourselves in a noisy place, to cultivate good thoughts, to counter the noise. It's not so much the external noise that is disturbing, but one's internal concerns and anxieties. You can always avoid hearing noises, but you cannot avoid worries. At the root of it all is the nous, the mind. Our eyes could be looking at something without really seeing it. When I am praying, I may have my eyes open, but I don't really see anything. person must attain a kind of divine absence of mind in order to experience inner tranquility and not be distracted by noise while praying. One can actually attain such a state of divine absent-mindedness where he no longer hears the noise, or he hears it only when he wants to, or actually when his mind comes back from heaven. To continue, shouting was completely unacceptable in the monasteries of St. Pachomius. He declared, quote, chatting, not only with strangers but with our brothers, or shouting when speaking, we must hold as an abomination. For this is the way with the idle and those who are heedless of their soul's fervor. If someone needs to ask his neighbor a question, he must do so quietly, without shouting. St. Basil the Great said that people who shout should not even be in the monastery. Quote, whoever in giving advice or an order uses a very loud, a piercing tone, gives an impression of arrogance thereby, and should not be in a spiritual community. End quote from Basil's Ascetical Works, Volume 9, page 221. In his Rules for Nuns, St. Caesarius of Arles wrote, they should never speak in a loud voice, according to that saying of the Holy Apostle, let all clamor be removed from you. Ephesians 4:31. Because this is not at all proper or becoming. St. Fructuosus of Braga wrote in his Rule for the Monastery of Compluto, it is unbefitting for a monk to be noisy in speech, or wrathful, or jesting, or mocking. Likewise, Elder Emilianos of Simonopetra told his monks, anyone who raises his voice in the cells or the hallways deserves many penances. Such people reveal the boorishness of their soul and disgrace their parents and themselves. There is no greater debasement for a person than to be heard shouting. In order to be heard, don't shout from far away. Make the effort to go near to the other person. This is what courtesy dictates. End of quote. Eurondissa Macrina also taught her nuns to avoid unnecessary noises. Quote, we should not knock loudly on the doors, but very carefully. With one hand we will open them, and with the other hand we will close them. After lunch it is forbidden to gather and talk or shout, which would bother the other sisters. We should not shout. Punishment 50 prostrations. Likewise, St. Columnus wrote in his monastic rule, him who has spoken with a shout, that is, has talked in a louder tone than the usual, is to be punished with 6 blows. St. Donatus of Bescancan also wrote, none who are there in the monastery's infirmary should speak in a loud voice that can be heard outside. If they do, let them suffer a supposition of silence or 50 blows. 16. Laughter. Many of the Holy Fathers criticized all kinds of laughter quite harshly. St. Basil the Great wrote, being overcome with unrestrained and immoderate laughter is a sign of intemperance, and shows that one cannot control his emotions and suppress his soul's laxity by a stern use of reason. It is not unbecoming, however, to show merriment of soul by a cheerful smile, though only so far as Scripture says, a glad heart maketh a cheerful countenance, Proverbs 15:13. But raucous laughter and uncontrollable shaking of the body are not indicative of a well-regulated soul or of personal dignity or self-mastery. This kind of laughter Ecclesiastes also reprehends as especially subversive of firmness of soul. In the words, quote, laughter I counted error, Ecclesiastes 2:2. And again, as the crackling of thorns burning under a pot, so is the laughter of fools, Ecclesiastes 7:7. Moreover, the Lord appears to have experienced those emotions which are of necessity associated with the body, as well as those that betoken virtue, as for example weariness and compassion for the afflicted. But so far as we know from the story of the Gospel, he never laughed. On the contrary, he even bemoaned those who are controlled by laughter, Luke 6, verse 25. End of quote, Basil the Great. St. Gregory the theologian taught, Laughter deserves the laughter, i.e., that is of contempt of those who reason well, and especially crude laughter, which is worse than all. St. John Chrysostom taught that laughter is unbecoming to monastic mourning and asceticism. Quote from his homilies of the Gospel of St. John, an epistle to the Hebrews, Nicene and post-Nicene fathers. Do you not hear Paul saying, let filthiness and foolish talking and jesting be put away from you, Ephesians 5:4. He places jesting along with filthiness. And dost thou laugh? And dost thou a solitary laugh at all, and relax thy countenance? Thou that art crucified, thou that art a mourner, tell me, dost thou laugh? Where dost thou hear of Christ doing this? Nowhere. This is the season of grief and tribulation, of discipline and subjection of the body, of conflicts and of sweating. And dost thou laugh? End quote. The Golden Mouth. To continue, St. Pachomius decreed, let absolutely no one laugh, so that there will not apply to us the reproach of the Scriptures, they make bread for laughter, Ecclesiastes 10:19. Abba John the Dwarf related, once when the brothers were eating at the agape meal, one of the brothers laughed at table. And Abba John wept when he saw him, saying, what on earth can that brother have in his heart that he laughed when he should have wept, since he is eating at an agape? From the alphabetical sayings of the Desert Fathers. St. John of Sinai instructed his monks, if nothing goes well with humility as mourning, certainly nothing is so opposed to it as laughter. He who sometimes mourns and sometimes indulges in luxury and laughter is like one who pelts the dog of sensuality with bread. In appearance, he's driving it away, but in fact, he's encouraging it to be constantly with him. End quote. The Ladder of Divine Ascent, 71 and 72 pages. St. Theodore the Studite reminded his monks that laughter is contrary to their lofty calling. Why, my children, have we come here, having departed from the world and having separated ourselves from our parents and relatives and friends and cities and homelands? Was it not to save our souls? Was it not to please the Lord? Was it not to acquire the eternal blessings? Was it not to have our sins forgiven that we had committed in our lives? Was it not to live angelically, imitating the bodiless spirits and especially our holy and thrice blessed fathers? So how is it that we do the opposite? Instead of weeping, we laugh. Instead of purifying ourselves, we dirty ourselves. Instead of being restrained, we behave boldly. Instead of fasting, we lack self-control. Instead of obeying, we are insolent. And instead of being humble, we exalt ourselves. Antiochus of the Lavra of St. Savas wrote, it is not permitted that Christians laugh at all, and especially monks who have crucified themselves to the world. We have not been called to levity and laughter only to hear woe unto thee, but to be within paradise, through the consolation of mourning. For our entire struggle is for our soul, and there is great danger of eternal torment. St. James, the brother of the Lord, wrote, be afflicted and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned into mourning and your joy to gloom. James 4, verse 9. Commenting on this, St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain wrote, the outpouring and joy of Christian hearts should only reach the point of calmly smiling, as Sirach has said, a wise man will scarcely smile a little. Sirach 21, verse 20. The rule of Paul and Stephen took a more moderate stance and cautioned only against immoderate laughter. Quote, all of us should beware of indulging without moderation in jesting and laughing, for who does not know that laughter beyond measure is the gate to disorder and folly? The biographer of St. Lazarus of Mount Galician, quote, mentions him smiling on a number of occasions and even joking at the folly of his monks or visitors, often as a means of gentle reproach. Elder Ephrem also was more lenient, perhaps as a practical accommodation to our contemporary culture, or perhaps as a concession, because We are not at a high enough spiritual state, such that laughter causes more harm than good. He expressed the opinion that laughter, even for monastics, is not only acceptable, but it is a sign of normality. He not only appreciated jokes, but even told a few innocent ones himself. Footnote. For example, one day as he left his house, he saw a cat eating from the dish of cat food outside the house. When he came back 3 hours later and saw the same cat eating there again, he said with a knowing smile, "That cat has been eating for 3 hours." But he also avoided excess humor. For example, when he was given an extremely playful poodle that behaved hilariously at times, he kept it only for a month before deciding to give it away because it was ruining our monastic seriousness. To continue. Nevertheless, he did agree with St. Basil that loud laughter is unbecoming. And he also warned us that if we are so overcome by laughter that we reach the point of tears, we can expect a punishment to come from God for our lack of self-control. St. Eustathios of Thessaloniki also had a moderate stance toward monastic laughter. Quote, "A great schema monk should be cheerful and at all times smile decorously. In fact, if the humor is greater, he should even laugh. I do not like those who have permanently ostracized laughter from their life, since I have heard in Scripture that those who weep now are more blessed because they will laugh. Therefore, this kind of servant of God, that is the monk, should do likewise when something funny happens. He should have a sweet look, and with this sweetness he will attract the attention of his listeners. He should display a genuine friendliness, like our Lord who is comely in beauty." Psalm 44, verse 2. Commenting on the canon attributed to St. Anthony the Great, "May your face always be downcast," Elder Emilianos explained to his monks, quote, "The saint did not mean that we should be gloomy. Man must be serious, not a joker or frivolous. A frivolous person is always laughing. When someone laughs when he is speaking to you, or when you're giving him advice or correcting him, such a person is immature. With this canon, St. Anthony is trying to prevent relationships of familiarity that waste time, which are the results of talking too much. When you are serious, other people respect you and acknowledge you. So you should need to guard yourself from your surroundings so that people don't approach you too easily. They should love you but simultaneously respect you. No one respects the person who is bubbly, idle, a complainer." End of quote, Emilianos. To continue, further excerpts from the Holy Fathers condemning familiarity and laughter may be found in Book 2 of the Evangelinos. The monastic editors of this, in English, added this reasonable conclusion, quote, "Here, the Fathers put forth a high standard of sobriety, as a warning against frivolity and witless gawking, cackling, and undignified displays of jocularity. Humor and subdued laughter are not amicable, that is, hostile to proper Christian or within limits monastic life, but the strict observance of the Desert Fathers should serve as a guideline for controlling such behavior." 17. Frugality. The Holy Fathers and contemporary elders were always careful not to be wasteful even in minor things. For example, when Elder Ephraim saw a small nightlight in an outlet on the wall that remained on during the daytime, he told us to unplug it so that it would not waste electricity. Likewise, Yorundisa Macrina considered frugality important enough to mention it in her rules for her nuns, that they should not leave lights on. When there were holes in the heels of Elder Ephraim's socks, instead of replacing them, he merely rotated them so that the hole would be on the top and thus not visible, and continued wearing them. Footnote, this kind of frugality is what Abba Dorotheus would call acting according to conscience in material things. To continue, but we, of course, gave him new socks as soon as he took off those socks with holes. From the following quote of his, it seems that he learned this frugality from St. Joseph the Hesychist. Quote, "He, St. Joseph, our Papu, was also very cautious to be frugal with our belongings. With quotes from the Bible and patristic writings, he taught us the values of living frugally and treasuring the smallest morsel of food so as not to lose God's blessing. This is why whenever he dropped a grain of wheat or a little piece of rusk, he would always bend down and pick it up, even later in his life when he had difficulty moving. Elder Ephraim was also cautious not to let any food spoil and was grieved when we carelessly did so. The regulations of Horsius spoke of this. Quote, "Let no one let anything spoil through his negligence, knowing that it is the fruit of others' labors or of his own. For nothing escapes God, not even a widow's 2 mites or a glass of fresh water. In truth, we will be questioned by the judge about every deed." Likewise, the communal rule of St. Columbanus commands, "Whoever of the brethren to whom the care of cooking or serving has been entrusted has spilt any drop, it is ordained to correct him by prayer in church after the end of the office, so that the brethren pray for him. In the same manner, let him who has lost the crumbs be corrected by prayer in church. But if through negligence or forgetfulness or failure of care he has lost more than usual either of fluids or of solids, let him do penance with a long pardon in church by prostrating himself without moving any limb while they sing 12 psalms at the 12th hour." St. John Cassian wrote, "During the week of a certain brother, as the bursar was going about, he noticed 3 lentils lying on the ground. They had slipped out of the hands of the weekly server, along with the water in which they were soaking, as he was hastening to prepare them for cooking. He at once consulted the abbot on this matter, and he judged him a pilferer and a waster of sacred goods, and suspended him from prayer. This crime of negligence was not forgiven him until he had absorbed it by an act of public repentance. For they believed that not only they themselves are not their own, but that everything that is theirs has been consecrated to the Lord. Hence, whatever has once been brought into the monastery must in their judgment be treated with all respect as sacrosanct. Likewise, when a monk at the monastery of St. Savas cooked too many lima beans and threw out the extra, St. Savas gathered up the beans, made a delicious meal out of them, and reproached the cook. Therefore, we should be careful also not to waste or break anything out of carelessness. St. Basil the Great wrote, "How should the working monks care for the tools entrusted to them? First of all, as things consecrated and offered to God. Secondly, remembering that without them they cannot render the diligent service that is due from them. What if a man loses a tool through carelessness or spoils it contemptuously? Let him that spoils it be judged sacrilegious, and he that loses it guilty of sacrilege, since they are all dedicated to the Lord and offered to God." Similarly, the 5th century rule of the forefathers taught, "The brothers must also know that everything whatever that is handled in the monastery, be it utensils or iron tools or anything else, has been consecrated. Should any of the brothers treat anything negligently, let him know that he has his portion with that king who drank with his concubines from the consecrated vessel of God's house, and what sort of punishment he deserved." St. Benedict agreed with this and wrote, "Let him regard all the vessels of the monastery and all its substance as if they were sacred vessels of the altar." The rule of the master states, "If any of the monastery's utensils are broken by anyone through carelessness, the one who broke them is not to go to table until he has penitently made satisfaction to the abbot, going down on his knees in humility. St. Porphyrius of Capso was so careful not to break things that he was able to say, 'Never in my life have I broken a dish or a glass.'" 18. Visitors. St. John Chrysostom urged laymen to visit monasteries with the following words. Quote from his homily 14 on 1 Timothy 5:8. "Inquire diligently for holy men that are truly such, who, in the retirement of the desert, cannot beg, but are wholly devoted to God. Take a long journey to visit them, and give with thine own hand. For thou mayest profit much more in thine own person if thou givest. Dost thou see their tents, their lodging? Dost thou see the desert? Dost thou see the solitude? Often when thou hast gone to bestow money, thou givest thine whole soul. Thou art detained and hast become his fellow captive, and hast been alike estranged from the world. Go then to their tabernacles. To go to the monastery of a holy man is to pass, as it were, from earth to heaven. Thou seest not there what is seen in a private house. That company is free from all impurity. There is silence and profound quiet. The words mine and thine are not in use among them. And if thou remainest there a whole day or even two, the more pleasure thou wilt enjoy. End of quote. St. John Chrysostom. St. Paul taught, render honor to whom honor is due, Romans 13:7. Therefore special guests are treated with greater honor. As St. Isidore of Seville wrote, and although the good of hospitality ought to be shown graciously to all, still, to monks and clerics, a more abundant display of honor and hospitality must be shown. Likewise, the rule of St. Pachomius states, when people come to the door of the monastery, they shall be received with greater honor if they are clerics or monks. If they wish to join the assembly of the brothers at the time of prayer and the synaxis, and they are of the same faith, they shall be brought in to pray. In accordance with that rule, and the numerous canons in the Rudder forbidding praying with heretics, the non-Orthodox do not participate in prayers in church and in the refectory. However, the Holy Fathers have made some exceptions to this rule for the sake of economia, that is, leniency. As Father Anastasios Gotsopoulos explains, to quote, for reasons of economia, it has been permitted in the past for heretics or non-Christians to attend Orthodox worship, even the Divine Liturgy, when they are disposed to acquainting themselves with the worshiping life of our Church. One of the most characteristic examples is the attendance of the Divine Liturgy in the Holy Temple of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople by a delegation of Russian idolaters, and the subsequent Christianization of the entire Russian people. Furthermore, the Blessed Chrysostom would invite heretics to the temple where he preached in the hope that they would return to the truth of the Church. Quote, here, I invite the heretic. He either attends or does not attend. If he does attend, let him be taught by my voice. If he does not attend, let him learn through whatever you have heard. On broadening the aforementioned suggestion of St. Nicephorus the Confessor regarding the entry into heretics' temples for the purpose of venerating the holy relics in there, we can accept that the entry of heterodox and orthodox temples is likewise permitted. If they desire to venerate holy relics, that we safeguard in our temples, and that they too respect. Any prohibition of entry and veneration of the holy relics would naturally be a far cry from the genuine ecclesiastic spirit. And of course, in cases where the heterodox return holy relics to our church, reasons of hospitality and gratitude will dictate their presence, and for the sake of economia, in the related ecclesiastic functions, naturally without any active liturgical participation in our Orthodox worship. The patriarchs of Constantinople, Gennadios Scholarios, Dositheus of Jerusalem, and the Archbishop of Ohrid, Bulgaria, Demetrios Chomantanios, when referring to those heretics who come respectfully to attend our Orthodox worship and ask for our blessing, all recommend that we do not send them away, but on the contrary, even offer them andiron and our holy water. We would remind the reader and the listener of the visitation of God's grace on the holy new martyr Ahmet through andiron. It is characteristic that while Gennadios allows the Orthodox to bless the heretics, he discourages them from asking for the blessing and holy water of the heretics. It is therefore enough that you do not ask for their blessing, for they are heterodox and separate. Demetrius of Ohrid feels the need to justify this suggestion of his, saying that this custom has the power to gradually attract them fully toward our holy ethos and dogmas. Another case where heretics are permitted to participate in an Orthodox service by economia is during the funeral service and burial that is performed by economia for a heterodox person by an Orthodox priest, when there are no pastors of the dogma of the deceased, as well as during the performance of the sacrament of matrimony, when the one member happens to be a heterodox, a mixed marriage. St. Benedict wrote in his monastic rule, "On no account let anyone who is not ordered to do so associate or speak with guests, but if he meet or see them, having saluted them humbly, as we've said, and asked a blessing, let him pass on, saying that he is not allowed to speak with a guest." Likewise, Jorondisa Macrina gave the following rules to her nuns. It is forbidden to pay attention to and look curiously at the visitors. Likewise, we may not speak with visitors without a blessing. If they ask us something, we will refer them to the appropriate sister. When people who know us visit, we will speak with them after obtaining a blessing from the abbess, who will decide how long we will be with them. Similarly, Elder Ephraim forbade his monks to speak with visitors unless they had a blessing to do so. Elder Emilianos explained how the virtue of watchfulness transforms a monk's approach towards others, including visitors. Watchfulness is a jump from the present, fake, deceptive, worldly life to the true life. Without watchfulness, nipsis, no matter how determined a monk may be, he is only fooling himself. Watchfulness and nipsis, basically of the mind but also of the heart, raises man above the ground. Someone who is walking on a muddy path becomes full of mud and becomes one with the clay, whereas someone on horseback is untouched by it and suffers no change. The same thing happens to him who has watchfulness. He is up high and has lofty path. Watchfulness is being carefree of everything. I am not interested in this and that. I am not interested when one person leaves, when another whines, why someone else didn't smile, and so forth. It takes a complete indifference and ignorance and unconcern of everything. A small interest immediately makes me a fleshly person, walking in the mud. It takes an indifference not only in thought but also in works and deeds. For example, you see two visitors enter the monastery and you wonder, who are these two people who came in? Well, what does it matter to you? What are you, the gatekeeper? And this thought alone is sufficient to bring you down to the muddy path, to a mundane life. 19. Relatives. The Holy Fathers have traditionally applied the following words of the Lord to monastics. Quote, "If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple." Luke chapter 14, verse 26. Of course, the sense of the word, quote, hate here is to become emotionally detached from one's relatives. Thus the rule of St. Comgall states, if you have a son or family and have decided to leave them to become a monk, you are then to regard yourself as dead. You must not seek out your relations or even think about them. Likewise, the rule of the Master says, let him who has joined the monastery know that henceforth his paternal home is foreign to him. Let him make up his mind that now he no longer has access to its threshold, for unless one leaves father or mother or brothers or home, he cannot be a disciple of Christ. For this same reason, the 5th century Syriac rules of Rabula for the monks to state, the Resai Darata, or the Igumon, the abbot, shall not allow the brothers to meet with their relatives, nor that they go out and go to them, in order that they do not relax in their zeal. The rule of Tarn was less strict and recommended merely that parents should not be allowed to come and go with frequency, and let no one attend the wedding banquet of his brothers. St. John of Sinai elaborated on the stance of monastics toward their relatives. To quote from the Ladder of Divine Ascent, pages 16 to 17. It is not from hatred that we separate ourselves from our own people or places, God forbid, but to avoid the harm which might come to us from them. In this, as in everything else, it is Christ who teaches us what is good for us. for it is clear that he often left his parents according to the flesh. And when he was told, "Thy mother and thy brethren are seeking for thee," our good Lord and Master at once showed us an example of dispassionate hatred when he said, "My mother and my brethren are they who do the will of my Father who is in heaven." Matthew chapter 12, verse 50. Longing for God extinguishes longing for our parents. And so anyone who says he has both is deceiving himself. He should listen to him who says, "No one can serve two masters." Matthew 6, verse 24. "I have not come," says the Lord, "to bring peace on earth," that is, love of parents for sons and love of brothers for brothers who have resolved to serve me, but war and a sword. Matthew 10, verse 34. In order to separate lovers of God from lovers of the world, the lovers of material things from lovers of spiritual things, the lovers of fame from the humble-minded. For strife and separation delight the Lord when they spring from love for himself. End of quote, John of the Ladder. In the same spirit, St. Basil the Great also said, to quote from his Ascetical Works, Volume 9, page 18, Wagner, "Even in the beginning of your renunciation of the world, show yourself a man, and that you may not be dragged down by attachments to your blood relatives. Strengthen yourself by exchanging mortal for immortal aspirations. Above all, we monastics renounce the devil and carnal passions, and having given up secret and shameful things, ties of physical relationships, human friendships, and any mode of life that conflicts with the strictness of the gospel of salvation. And what is still more necessary? He that has stripped off the old man with his deeds, who is corrupted in accordance with the lusts of deceit, denies himself." Colossians 3:9 and Ephesians 4:22. Also, he repudiates all worldly affections which could hinder him from reaching the goal of piety. Such a one, moreover, regards as his true parents those who in Christ Jesus have brought him forth by the gospel, and looks upon as his brethren those who have received the same spirit of adoption. A man who is strongly seized with the desire of following Christ can no longer be concerned with anything pertaining to this life, not even with the love of his parents or relatives when this is in opposition to the precepts of the Lord. For in this case, these words apply, "If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother," and so on. Elder Emilianos explained this in more detail in the regulations of the Holy Cenobium of the Annunciation or Emilia. To quote, "In their contacts with people from outside the community, the nuns shall not forget that monastic experience follows the severance of bonds with the world, and estrangement to all things temporal, and liberation from social ties and duties. It is acquired through labors by day and by night, and indefatigable struggles. As a result, remembrance of one's former life or involvement in the life of the outside world constitutes a breach in the wall cloistering the monastic state. Parents and siblings of any nun shall be considered parents and siblings of the whole community, and, provided they live according to God, shall enjoy all honor and all support. It should be clear, however, that members of the Cenobium shall be cut off from their own family." Footnote, although cutting oneself off entirely from one's relatives has often been implemented in Orthodox monasticism, it is not something that Elder Ephraim and many other contemporary elders have implemented in their monasteries. Instead, we endeavor to maintain the most beneficial balance between too much and too little communication with relatives. To continue, visits by relatives or friends to their cells shall be avoided. Nuns shall converse with visitors, known to them or not, only after being given the obedience. They shall reveal nothing to people who do not belong to the community, nor shall they introduce into it any ideas or events from the outside, unless they have a blessing to do so. Elder Emilianos. 20. Correspondence. According to ancient monastic traditions, the abbot has the authority to open the mail of his monks and to withhold any letters or gifts that he deems could be spiritually harmful for them to have. For example, St. John Cassiano said, "When all the brothers have come together for the synaxis, he shall beg for pardon, prostrate on the earth until the service of prayers is concluded, if he tries to receive someone's letter or to reply to one without the permission of his Abba." From John Cassion's The Institutes, page 85 to 86. St. Christodulus of Patmos wrote, "Do not any of you receive a letter without the superior's knowledge, or send one clandestinely." The 13th century Typicon of the Monastery of Macarai says, "If anyone is found writing to anyone or receiving a letter without the permission of the superior, let him eat dry food for 3 days." In the same spirit, the Typicon of the Monastery of St. John the Forerunner of Foberos wrote, "Those who acquire some possessions contrary to the rule of the monastery, without the knowledge of the superior, will be liable to punishment. Similar to them is the person who receives messages from friends and relatives and replies to them." Likewise, St. Benedict taught, "Let it not be allowed at all for a monk to give or to receive letters, tokens, or gifts of any kind, either from parents or any other person, nor from each other, without the permission of the abbot. But even if anything is sent him by his parents, let him not presume to accept it before it hath been made known to the abbot. And if he order it to be accepted, let it be in the abbot's power to give it to whom he pleases." St. Cesarius of Arles agreed. Letters should be received secretly from no one, not even from relatives, nor should letters of any kind whatever be sent without the permission of the abbess. St. Fructocus of Braga also wrote in his rule for the monastery of Cumpludo, "No monk is to accept any presents or to receive letters." The Syriac Rules for the Nuns, written some time between the 5th and 8th centuries, states, "It is not lawful for any of the sisters to write a letter nor to receive from anybody without the knowledge of the abbess." The Rule of Tarn likewise states, "Anyone who presumes to receive anyone's letters and gifts, if he does not at once make public what he received, and from whom shall undergo a severe punishment." Geranda Milianos explained in the regulations of the Holy Cenobium of the Annunciation or Milia, "Exchange of letters, all information from the outside, or communication from within, as well as visits outside the cenobium, plainly constitute communion with the world, which the nun has renounced." 21. Entering someone else's cell. Abba Isaiah said, "Let no one at all enter another brother's cell." And St. Pachomius taught, "Without the order of the superior, nobody will be permitted to enter in the cell of another brother." Likewise, St. Simeon the New Theologian advised, "Do not enter into the cell of anyone without the permission of him who is your father according to God." The Typicon of the Monastery of Macarais, early 13th century, also gave a punishment for doing this. If anyone without permission or absolute necessity enters into the cell of another, or sleeps in it, or starts doing handiwork, let him be banished from the church and the refectory for 3 days and eat dry food. In the same spirit, Eurondis of Macrina of blessed memory gave a punishment of 50 prostrations for doing this. Eurondis of Macrina also wrote, quote, "When we're about to enter the cell of the Eurondissa or of another sister, we should knock on the door and say, 'Through the prayers of our holy fathers.' Only when we hear the answer, 'Amen,' will we open the door." Elder Ephraim agreed with this teaching and was displeased with some monastics who, instead of saying, "Through the prayers of our holy fathers," merely said, "Through the prayers." In other traditions, the Jesus prayer is said instead whenever entering a room. St. Herman of Alaska explained how this rule helped protect him from temptations. To quote from Herman, a wilderness saint, Holy Trinity Publications, 2012. His disciple Gerasim once entered the elder's cell without saying the typical prayer. He did not receive an answer to any of his questions to Father Herman. The next day he asked the elder the reason for his silence the previous day. Father Herman answered, When I arrived on this island and settled in this deserted place, demons came to me many times in human and animal form, as if for some necessity. I often endured various offenses and temptations from them, so now I do not speak to those who enter my cell without a prayer. Traditionally, a monastic does not lock the door to his cell. St. Pachomius decreed, "No one shall sleep in a locked cell, nor shall anyone get a locked room, except by order." Likewise, St. Caesarius of Arles wrote in his rule for nuns, and was paraphrased by Donatus of Basicon in his own rules. Donatus footnote, "No one is allowed to choose a separate establishment or have a bedroom or cupboard or anything private which can be closed with a key." Quote, the Typicon of the Monastery of St. John the Foreigner of Foberos, written in the 12th century, explains the reason for this. Quote, "Things that are locked up are all secret, and their owner does not wish them to be revealed. But all your possessions are in common and are open, and therefore there will be no need among you for the use of keys. It should be recognized by everyone that the person who does this is a thief, and does not wish what is hidden by him to be revealed, and for this reason he uses a lock." St. Gerasimos of the Jordan made the rule for his lavra that the cell should always be left open, and any brother in need should be at liberty to take what was found in a cell, if its occupier was absent. Even though St. Pachomius taught that the monks are not allowed to enter each other's cells, St. Benedict taught that the abbot has the duty of entering their cells. The cells should, quote, "be frequently examined by the abbot to prevent personal goods from being found. And if anyone should be found with anything that he did not receive from the abbot, let him fall under the severest discipline." End of quote. Although we do not know precisely how often St. Benedict wanted the abbot to examine their cells, Abbot Chenut the Great in the 4th century and the Typicon of the Monastery of Evrangetis in the 11th century decreed that this should be done once a month, whereas St. Frugality of Braga in the 7th century, he recommended it twice a week. Corresponding footnotes. 12 times per year, once a month, the Father Superior shall enter all the houses of the congregation and inspect all the cells that are within them, and all alcoves and all vessels that are holding their portion that they've put there, so that he might know whether they have an excess beyond the ordinance that is laid down, or whether someone has committed impiety by taking anything into his cell against the edifying rule that is laid down. And from the 11th century Evangelists, the superior must do this also. That is, he should enter your cells once a month, whenever he wishes. And if any have extra items, he should take them away and deposit them in the storehouse or give them to those in need. From the Byzantine monastic foundation documents. And twice a week, the abbot and prior should turn over and examine carefully each one's bed to see that no one has anything superfluous concealed there. End of quote. 22. Exiting the monastery. A part of monastic renunciation of the world is to remain within one's monastery as much as possible. St. Anthony the Great taught, "Just as fish perish when they lie exposed for a while on the dry land, so also the monks relax their discipline when they linger and pass time with you, that is, laymen in the world, the kosmiko. Therefore, we must rush back to the mountain, like the fish to the sea, so that we might not, by remaining among you, forget the things within us." Likewise, St. Chariton laid down the precept in the early 4th century that monks must not emerge frequently from their cells, but rather stay inside as much as possible. St. Basil the Great wrote, "Departure from the monastery is not permitted except for a duty or an emergency. To avoid dissipation of the heart, refrain as much as you can from going abroad, that is, outside your monastery at all. Have you deserted your cell? Then you have left continency behind you. You have lowered your gaze toward the world." In the era of St. Pachomius, the monastery wall was intended to isolate the monks and protect them from the outside world and its temptations. In the, quote, white monastery of Chanute, it was possible to leave the monastery only through a tunnel. St. Nilos the ascetic wrote, "Let us avoid staying in cities and villages so that their inhabitants run to us. Let us seek the wilderness and so draw after us the people who now shun us. For Scripture praises those who leave the cities and dwell in the rocks and are like the dove." Jeremiah 48:28. The holy foreigner and Baptist John also lived in the wilderness, and the population of entire towns came out to him. The Holy Fathers of the Fourth Ecumenical Council ratified this approach by teaching that monks in every city and country be subject to the bishop and embrace quietude, hezekiah, and pay heed only to fasting and prayer, while continuing in the places patiently whereunto they have been assigned, without intruding upon or meddling in ecclesiastical affairs, nor leaving their own monasteries unless at any time they be permitted to do so by the bishop of the city on account of some emergency. Bearing this in mind, St. Simeon the New Theologian wrote to his disciple Arsenios, "Do not go out from the monastery frequently. Once a month, for serious matters, is sufficient for you." St. Gregory Palamas explained why monks should stay in their holy monastery from the Complete Homilies of Gregory Palamas, page 397. What good does it to us if we take flight from the world once and for all and find refuge in houses of prayer consecrated to God, but then to leave them daily and become involved in the world again? Tell me how, if you love frequenting the town squares, you will avoid the incentives to passions which bring about the death of the soul, separating a man from God. This death comes upon us through our senses, as if through windows within us. Do you think we, who have been born and brought up in the world, can avoid being harmed or suffering wounds and a change for the worse in our inner selves when we are faced with the passions in their various guises, and with hearing and joining in prolonged and unseemly conversations? That would be absolutely impossible. For these reasons, the Fathers imitated the forerunner of grace, St. John the Baptist. They bade farewell to the world and fled the company of those devoted to it. End of quote, Palamas. To continue, when St. Mille Rouen was asked by a monk how to conduct himself, he replied, "I advise you to remain always in the place where you normally dwell. Have nothing to do with the affairs of the world. Never go to a law court with anyone, or to any gathering to intercede for anyone. Instead, stay at home in prayer, meditating on your reading and giving instruction, should there be anyone who desires such of you." St. Nectarius of Aegina urged his nuns not to leave their convent even in order to attend a vigil service. He explained, "A vigil outside of the convent allows the nuns' minds to wander, and they lose everything they sought to gain by attending the vigil. I ardently advise you that you remain in the convent, seek solitude, and in it you will find what you desire. You may go out to take a walk for a little while, walking around the convent altogether. Let no one go anywhere by herself." Elder Emilianos explained why a monk should not go out of his monastery as follows. When we go out of our monastery, we're no longer with our brethren, but with worldly people. This is dangerous and serious, apart from the moral dangers this entails. A true monk passes through a fearsome trial. A monk has learned to follow an early morning schedule, to be in a vigilant state, in a quiet atmosphere, and in general to have a humble stance. When he goes out into the world, the conditions change, and then he does not know how to behave. If one could live the gospel in the world, there'd be no need to become a monk. So when a monk leaves his monastery, his powers are weakened. This is why St. Augustine says in his monastic rules that another monk should accompany him. In this manner, he will be strengthened and will pass through this exceptional situation and will return to his monastery as soon as possible, if possible even the same day, as the Holy Fathers say. Furthermore, it is good that two monks go out in order to avoid criticism. When you are by yourself, people can say many things about you, But when there's someone else with you, whatever evil they say about you will not be believable. Besides, a single day outside the monastery means that at least 2 months will pass without true prayer. The Holy Fathers would also pay great attention to whom they would send out of the monastery. For the most part, they would send a competent monk along with an older monk. The competent monk would be a specialist in the matter at hand, whereas the older monk has another spirit. He lives in another world. The older monk does not conform to the younger monk. They have 2 different worldviews. In other words, the Holy Fathers took care that tradition would be secured with the specialist, so that experience would be joined to power in order that they would do something correctly. End of quote. Amelia knows. To continue, when a monk goes into the world to take care of a particular need for which he has attained the blessing, he may not take advantage of being in town to take care of other matters for which he has not obtained the blessing. As stated in the Rule of Tarn, if any of the brothers is directed by a senior to go to the city, castle, or locality on some business, let him not dare approach any place except that to which he was assigned. The Holy Fathers teach that a monk may not exit the monastery without the abbot's permission. For example, St. Pachomius wrote, "No one should have leave to go out into the field or go walking in the monastery or proceed outside the monastery's walls unless he has acquired the superior of the house and he has gained permission." Footnote, with the same understanding, St. John the Prophet told a monk who had been sent to Jerusalem but also went to pray at the Jordan without a blessing, "You should go nowhere without an explicit blessing, for whatever takes place according to one's own thought, even if it appears to be good, is in fact not pleasing to God." Barsanuphius and John, letter 356. In response to the question if a monk may go away anywhere without mentioning it to the superior, St. Basil replied, "Since the Lord says, 'I am not come of myself, but he sent me,' John 7:28, how much rather should one of us not allow himself anything?" St. Benedict wrote in his rule, "Let him be punished who shall presume to go beyond the enclosure of the monastery or anywhere else, or to do anything, however little, without the order of the abbot." And St. Columbus taught, "The mortification of the monk is threefold. He must never think what he pleases, never speak what he pleases, never go where he pleases." The rule of the Master states, "Let him who wants to join the monastery know that he may not go outside the monastery without orders from the superior." Likewise, the Holy Fathers of the Sixth Ecumenical Council stated, "Men who are leading the solitary life of monasticism may themselves step out, when there is urgent need of their doing so, only with the blessing of the one in charge of the monastery." The anonymous Syriac rules for the nuns order, "It is not lawful for any of the sisters to go on a journey that is farther than 1 mile without the permission of the abbess." St. Yosif Volotsky made the following exception: "No one may go outside the monastery without a blessing. Monasteries which are in desolate places, situated far from cities and from villages, do not have so much need to be concerned over this." St. Benedict taught, "Let the brethren who are to be sent on a journey recommend themselves to the prayers of all the brotherhood and of the abbot. And after the last prayer, at the work of God, let a commemoration also be made for the absent brethren." At Philotheu Monastery on Manathos, we implemented this advice by commemorating the names of the absent fathers during the Paraclesis. St. Sophronia of Essex viewed this approach as a natural expression of the awareness that a monastic community is like a single organism. He told his monastics, "Please, when one of you is away, pray intensely for the person away and for every sick member of our community. You should live as a single body." St. Benedict added, "On the day that the brethren return from the journey, let them lie prostrate on the floor of the oratory at all the canonical hours, when the work of God is finished, and ask the prayers of all on account of failings. for fear that the sight of evil or the sound of frivolous speech should have surprised them on the way. Let no one presume to relate to another what he hath seen or heard outside of the monastery, because it is most hurtful. Likewise, the rule of Talot says that Saint Maelruin ordered his monks not to seek news of those who came to visit them, or even to carry on a conversation with them. Such news, he felt, was the cause of much harm and disturbance in the mind of one to whom it was told. Elder Ephraim recollected about his elder, St. Joseph the Hesychist. Quote from My Elder Joseph the Hesychist, page 439 and following. Yerunda would not let anyone talk about outside news, to speak about so-and-so, what he did, how he was doing. We did not know what was happening outside our hut. He ensured that there would be no idle talk. Criticism of others was non-existent. When someone tried to say something like that, Yerunda would strictly correct him and say, "You'll lose the grace of God, you wretch, and then you'll be kicking yourselves. Why are you sitting around criticizing? What does it matter to you? There's no room in here for news. Only onwards. Hezekiah and the prayer, nothing else. What other people are doing out there is none of our business. It is forbidden to talk about what other people are doing. We have to pay attention to what we are doing." End of quote. St. Joseph the Hesychist. Other Athonite saints of the 20th century were opposed to learning news from the media. St. Silouan, the Athonite, once told a Hira monk who believed that newspapers helped him to pray by seeing people's sufferings. Quote, "I don't care for newspapers with their news, because reading newspapers clouds the mind and hinders pure prayer. Newspapers don't write about people, but about events, and then not the truth. They confuse the mind, and whatever you do, you won't get at the truth by reading them." St. Paisios of the Holy Mountain often remarked, "Only once in my life did I read a newspaper to find out when I would be recruited to serve my military tour of duty before becoming a monk. If something happens, either it will become known, and I too will hear of it, or I will learn of it through prayer." Special caution with our eyes is needed whenever we are away from our monastery. Abba Isaiah taught, "If you travel to a city or to a town, let your eyes look downward, so that no inner warfare is aroused once you return to your cell." Because of this potential danger, Elder Ephraim wanted his monks to avoid going into town as much as possible. The 7th century Persian rules of Babai advise, if a necessity compels a monk to go out from his monastery, this shall be in the fear of God and piety, and he shall not go out except because of an emergency. He shall not be seen in the town and the village, and if it must be, he shall keep head and eyes down in order that he might not harm himself and become the cause of perdition for others. St. Savas was so strict with applying this principle that he drove a monk out of his monastery who had immodestly looked at a woman walking by. Quote, "One day, the godly one, St. Savas, was walking to the Jordan from Jericho with a young disciple, and they passed a large group of layfolk. Among them was an exquisite maiden. After the crowd had gone by, the elder, wishing to test the disciple, commented, 'I noticed that the maiden who just walked by is blind in one eye.' 'No, Father,' answered the disciple, 'she can see with both.' 'You're mistaken, child,' said the elder, but the disciple instead insisted that the girl could see perfectly well. And then the Yerunda asked him, 'How can you be certain?' 'Father,' replied the disciple, 'I studied her face carefully and can assure you that she has two beautiful, healthy eyes.' To this the elder said, 'When you were looking so closely at her face, did you not remember the words of the Holy Scriptures, which declare, "My son, let not the desire of beauty overcome thee, neither be thou caught by thine eyes, neither be captivated with her eyelids"? Proverbs chapter 6, verse 25. Because you do not guard your eyes, I will no longer permit you to live in my cell. The sayings of the Desert Fathers recorded for posterity, the following example of a monk who had great caution with his eyes. Quote from the Alphabetical Sayings of the Desert Fathers, Isidore of Scetis, number 8, page 145, Wortley. Abba Isidore once went to visit Abba Theophilus, the Archbishop of Alexandria. When he returned to Scetis, the brothers asked him, "How was the city?" And he said, "To tell you the truth, brothers, I did not see anybody's face other than the archbishop's." They were troubled when they heard this, and they said, "Were they utterly destroyed, Abba?" "Not so," he said, "but my logismo, my thought, did not overcome me to look at anybody." They were astonished when they heard this, and strengthened in their resolve to keep their eyes from wandering. St. Cosmas Athalos said, "Just as it is difficult for a lamb to associate with a wolf without being eaten, and for twigs to be among coals without igniting, it is likewise difficult for a monk to associate with women and a nun with men without being defiled and scandalized. The only way a monk can be saved is by fleeing far from the world." And with the same understanding, St. Joseph the Hesychist wrote, "If a monk needs to go out into the world, let him go. However, he must be all eyes and all light. He must see very clearly so that he won't suffer any harm while trying to help others. Young monks and nuns who are still in the prime of life are especially in danger when they go out into the world, since they're walking among many snares. As for those who have somewhat matured in age and have become withered through ascesis, the danger is not so great. They're not harmed so much as they benefit others, as long as they have experience and knowledge. But in general, a monk does not acquire any benefit from the world. He only gets praises and glory, which clean him out and leave him bare, and woe to him if God's grace does not protect him according to the need and purpose for which he was sent out." From Monastic Wisdom, page 56. St. Basil the Great wrote to his disciple Chilo, "Do not then for your kinsfolk's sake abandon your place. If you abandon your place, perhaps you will abandon your mode of life. Love not the crowd, nor the country, nor the town. Love the desert, even abiding by yourself with no wandering noose, regarding prayer and praise as your life's work." Likewise, St. Isaac the Syrian said, "A bird, wherever it may be, hastens back to its nest, there to hatch its young, and a monk possessing discernment hastens to his cell, there to produce the fruit of life." Despite the drawbacks of leaving one's monastery, St. Basil perceived also the benefit of not remaining constantly cloistered. Quote, "Each monk should remain for the most part in peace in his own dwelling and live there patiently, so that this behavior will bear witness to his stability. He should not be completely cloistered, but with confidence he should go out when necessary, as long as his conscience does not bother him, and visit the brethren who are great and beneficial because of their strictness of life. He should go out, as we said, with moderation and in an irreproachable manner. Going out will often dispel the negligence that has come to the soul. It gives him some strength and refreshment, and it inspires him to resume pious struggles with renewed eagerness." When St. Basil the Great was asked what trades are suitable for monastics, he emphasized selecting trades that minimize the need for exiting one's monastery. Trades should be chosen which allow our life to be tranquil and undisturbed, involving no difficulty in the procuring of the materials proper to them, nor requiring much exertion in selling the articles produced, nor leading to unsuitable or harmful association with men or women. In all things we must keep in mind that our special aim is simplicity and frugality. As for the arts of building, carpentry, the smith's trade, and farming, these are all in themselves necessary for carrying on life, and they provide much that is useful. They should not, therefore, be repudiated by any of us for reasons inherent in themselves, but as soon as they cause us anxiety or sever our union with the brethren, we must turn away from them, choosing in preference the trades which allow us to lead recollected lives in constant attendance on the Lord, and do not cause those who follow the practices of the devout life to be absent from psalmody and prayer, or draw away from their schedule those who are devoted to pious deeds. Those trades, then, which involve no detriment to the life we have undertaken are to be given a decided preference. Agriculture, especially, since its proper function is the procuring of necessities, and farmers are not obliged to do much traveling or running about hither and thither. St. Basil even felt that monks who went about in public to secure the necessities of life were sullying their reputation. Footnote: the reputation of the rest of the brethren, except for him who has been assigned the task of procuring the necessities, should be kept unsullied and blameless by their not being required to go about in public to secure the necessities of life. St. Benedict also emphasized the importance of monastic self-sufficiency. If it can be done, the monastery should be so situated that all the necessities, such as water, the mill, the garden, are enclosed, and the various arts may be plied inside of the monastery, so that there be no need for the monks to go outside, because it is not good for their souls. Similarly, the rule of the master says, everything necessary should be within, inside the gates, which means oven, machines, lavatory, garden, all that is required. So there may not be frequent occasions for the brothers to go outside repeatedly and mingle with people of the world. Were we to appear before the eyes of the devout and be venerated as angels by them, it would more be to our damnation, and it would be improper for them to say, the Benedict, to us unworthy of it, since we might be considered saints, which we are not. Or, on the other hand, the holy habit would be cheapened by the ridicule of some unbelievers as it went about in public and on the streets. Therefore, since all these things are located inside, let the gate of the monastery be always shut, so that the brothers enclosed within the Lord may, so to say, be already in heaven, separated from the world for the sake of God. Likewise, St. Paul of Mount Latros wrote, above all, you must not step easily out of the monastery without need, since it is both unsuitable to the monastic profession and dangerous. Abba Paul the Great, the Galatian, said, a monk who has the bare necessities in his cell, but goes out to care for more, is being fooled by the demons. For I myself have suffered this. St. Basil delineated how a monk should exit his monastery. Permission to travel should be granted to him who is able to make the journey without harm to his soul and with profit to his companions. If there is no suitable person, it is better to endure every inconvenience and every trouble, even to the point of death, and the lack of necessary supplies, rather than to allow certain harm to the soul for the sake of physical comfort. After returning, he who went should be examined by the superior as to the incidents which occurred, the sort of persons he met along the way, the words he spoke with them, the thoughts of his soul, and as to whether he passed every day and night in the fear of God or went astray and violated any of the rules, either by yielding to external circumstances or by giving in to his own indolence. Question 44 of the Long Rules of St. Basil. St. Columbanus assigned the following punishment for this. He who dares to make a journey without the permission of the superior, by going out free and unrestrained without any need, let him be chastised with 50 strokes. Father Epiphanios Theodoropoulos of blessed memory explained why it is necessary for a monk to leave his monastery in order to help others. Quote, I dare to claim that every monk, every true monk that is a missionary. I say every monk because my intent is not to limit the identity of the missionary only to those monks who have the grace of the priesthood and leave their holy monastery and with the permission of their bishop tour the cities and villages teaching and hearing confessions. Nor do I limit the identity of the missionary to those who have literary talent, and some are sometimes exceptionally skilled, and publish wonderful books which edify thousands of souls even for generations, such as St. Nicodemus. I, my brothers, believe, and don't think I'm crazy, for I shall justify this belief of mine that even those monks who never step out of the enclosure of their monastery and never wrote a single page are missionaries. You must be referring to their prayer, some of you might say. I certainly do refer to their prayer, but not only to prayer. The power of prayer, and especially of prayer by people whose life in God is purified or being purified, has great boldness before God. It is mighty. One heartfelt tear shed by a holy person is able to accomplish what would have taken many sermons and books. But prayer is just one of the means, but the foremost by which a monk does missionary work, that is, by which he helps to save souls. There are two other ways, my brothers. The second way is this: has a monastery ever been established without becoming a magnet that attracts people? Has there ever been a hermit in dens and mountains and caves? Hebrews 11:38. Without entire armies of pilgrims seeking from him either a word of consolation or merely to see his face, which teaches much and greatly edifies them. This happens not only in the old days, but even nowadays. How many who labor and are heavy laden, Matthew 11:28, with the journey of this life have taken refuge in holy monasteries to find a little peace of soul? How many people have benefited by the evocative atmosphere that prevails in the sacred services there? How many unbelievers and spiritually indifferent people have visited holy monastic dwellings for the sake of tourism and have felt twinges in their hearts because of what they saw there? Often a single visit sufficed to put their disbelief or indifference to the test. Let monks not go out into the world. Let the world go to them. Let them remain hidden within their cloistered enclosure. Their light shines and illuminates the surrounding areas. Sometimes it even illuminates places far away. Let them not say much. They have the quiet eloquence of a holy life. The third way is this: a monk, whether he is silent or preaches, is the loudest sermon. A sermon not with words but deeds. A powerful, stirring sermon. What do missionaries, the workers of our church, preach in their sermons, my brothers? What do they write about in their books? Which subjects? What do they urge us to do? To love God, to pray, to fight against our evil habits, to partake of the holy mysteries, to repent for our sins, to be humbled, not to be attached to material goods, to have our way of life in heaven, Philippians 3:20, and so forth. But isn't this exactly what a monk preaches? Not with his words, but with his example. Father Epiphanios Theodoropoulos, may we have his blessing. 23. Expulsion. Knowing when to expel a monk is a delicate matter, requiring much discernment. On the one hand, St. Isidore of Seville taught, although someone is immersed in the abyss of repeated and most serious vices, still he must not be cast out of the monastery, but restrained in keeping with the type of sin, in case he could have been amended by a penance of a long duration, should on being cast out be devoured by the devil's mouth. On the other hand, however, most of the Holy Fathers taught that when someone in the monastery is harming the rest of the brotherhood, he should be permanently expelled, quote, lest one diseased sheep infect the whole flock, as St. Benedict said. For example, the elders of Scetis said, if a brother is found to have a shortcoming that does not harm the brotherhood, they should put up with him. But if he troubles the rest of the brothers, they should expel him so that others are not lost along with him. With the same understanding, St. Basil the Great wrote, if he, that is the disobedient monk, is neither converted after much admonition, nor cures himself by his own actions, with tears and lamentations, being, as the proverb has it, his own destroyer, we should, as physicians do, cut him off from the body of the brethren as a corrupt and entirely useless member. Physicians indeed are wont to remove, by cutting and burning any member of the body they find infected with an incurable disease, so that the infection may not spread further and destroy adjacent areas one after the other. St. Basil. The 11th century Typicon of the monastery of Petruzonisa also called for expelling incorrigible monks. Quote from the Byzantine Monastic Foundation documents. But if any of the brothers is proved to be unwilling to live according to the terms of the rule, but opposes it and considers the reproof of the superior harsh and unhelpful, does not consider his rebuke to be for his own help and benefit, fighting against his shepherd and doctor and not accepting his reproof, such a person will be possessed by the devil. If such a person remains without improvement, then it is better that after the first and second and third piece of advice and rebuke, he be cut off like a rotten limb and be far away from the divine flock. The regular Orientalists likewise expelled those who could not amend their behavior. To quote, "If there is anyone so hard and such a stranger to the fear of the Lord that he is not amended by so many chastisements and so many pardons, he should be cast out of the monastery and regarded as an outsider, in case others should be endangered by his vice." Similarly, St. Athanasius of Athos declared, "Those, however, who do not improve their attitudes even by these means, but persist in the same behavior even after lengthy punishment, as diseased limbs should be cut off from the rest of the body of the community, so that their own contagion may not spread to their neighbors." St. John of Rila had the same approach. If someone is found among you who sows weeds, discords, and other temptations, you have to eliminate at once such a man from your assembly, so that this will not be transfigured into a devouring canker, according to the apostle, and not to spread the evil among the good ones, and lest any root of bitterness spring up and cause trouble by it, and the many be defiled. Hebrews 12, verse 15. And the wicked wolf not trouble the peaceful flock of Christ, because this sort of men will appear. In addition to incorrigible monks, monks who slandered others were also expelled from some monasteries. St. John of Sinai wrote of the monks in an exemplary monastery, "Above all, they strove never to injure a brother's conscience, and if ever someone showed hatred of another, the shepherd banished him like a convict to the isolation monastery. Once, when a brother spoke ill of a neighbor, the holy man, on hearing him, had him expelled immediately. I'm not having a visible devil here along with the invisible one," he said. In the same spirit, the Syrian anonymous rules of the communities decreed, "A monk who is a slanderer of his brothers and throws quarrel shall cease or go from the monastery as an enemy of the peace, since he has become a companion to that one, the slanderer of God in the paradise." End quote. 24. Clothing. The Holy Fathers taught that a monk's clothes should be ascetical. St. Basil the Great wrote, "An ascetic must not seek fine clothes or shoes, but should prefer the more base in order to show humility in this as well. The humble and abject spirit of monks is attended by a gloomy and downcast eye, neglected appearance, unkempt hair, and dirty clothes. Consequently, the characteristics which mourners affect designedly are found in us as a matter of course. The tunic should be drawn close to the body by a girdle, but let the belt not be above the flank, for that is effeminate, nor loose, so as to let the tunic slip through, for that is slovenly. And the stride should be neither sluggish, which would argue a laxity of mind, nor, on the other hand, brisk and swaggering, which would indicate that its impulses were rash. As for dress, its sole object is to be a covering for the flesh, adequate for winter and summer, and let neither brilliancy of color be sought, nor delicacy, softness of material." End of quote. From the Letters of St. Basil the Great, the Loeb Classic Library. In the same vein, the Holy Fathers of the Seventh Ecumenical Council said, as paraphrased by St. Nicodemus the Hagurite, "The iconoclasts, besides rejecting the holy icons, rejected also everything making for decency in the matter of clothing, and were wont to laugh at those wearing cheap and paltry garments. That is why they were wont to call monks darkics, that is to say, wearers of dark-colored clothes, making fun of the decency of the monkish habit." Ever since the beginning, men in holy orders have been wearing humble clothes. St. Gregory the Dialogist observed, "If there were not virtue in humble dress, the evangelist Matthew would not have noted so minutely of John the Baptist that he had his garments of camel's hair." Matthew 3, verse 4. Likewise, in the 11th century, St. Lazarus of Mount Galicion said, "As far as clothing goes, he, a monk, should always make use of more humble garments. In short, the person who truly wishes to be saved must seek everything that tends toward humility and simplicity and innocence, and avoid things which are grand and have only vain repute." Abba Isaac the priest criticized some other monks who lacked this kind of simplicity. "Our fathers and Abba Pambo wore old, patched-up clothes made of palm fiber. Now you're wearing expensive clothing. Go away from here." End of quote. St. Theodore the Studite told his monks, "The adornment of a monk is when he seeks to be unadorned. The beauty of a monk is not to strut arrogantly, preening, allow me to say it, like a whoremonger with nice belts and garments and shoes, but to keep the soul's ethos modest, to stand firm without yielding to the passions, to have inner peace from improper desires, additionally to be rough, unwashed for the most part, poorly dressed with a patched raso, a patched cowl, and other clothes, whereas seeking new changes of clothes that are very thin and well dyed is lustful covetousness." St. Theodore the Studite also taught, and St. Athanasius of Athos quoted him nearly verbatim in his own rule, "You shall not possess very distinctive or expensive clothing besides the priestly vestments. Rather, you should put on humble clothes and shoes in imitation of the fathers. You shall not spend lavishly either for your own lifestyle or for the reception of guests. This will distract you, since it belongs to a life devoted to pleasure." The reason why a monk should have humble clothes, according to Abba Dorotheus, is because they give rise to a humble disposition. The dispositions of a man riding a horse differ from those of a man riding a donkey. Those of the man seated on a throne from those of a man sitting on the floor. The dispositions of one beautifully clothed differ from one clad in rags. Abba Pambo taught that our monastic clothing should not be better than that of the other monks. The monk should wear a garment of such a kind that he could throw it out of his cell, and no one would steal it from him for 3 days. Likewise, St. John Cassian taught that monastic clothes should be commonplace so as to be indistinguishable in terms of novelty of color and cut from what is worn by other men of this chosen orientation, that is, of monastics. Finally, it should be different from the apparel of this world, in that it is kept completely in common for the use of the servants of God. He also added, "But we ourselves, that is, the monks of Gaul, as opposed to those in Egypt, should keep only those things that the situation of the place and the custom of the region permit. For the harshness of the winter does not allow us to be satisfied with sandals, or colobia, that is, short-sleeved cassocks, or a single tunic, and wearing a little hood and having melotis would evoke derision rather than edification in the beholder. Hence, we are of the opinion that of the things we've mentioned above, we should wear only what is in keeping with the humility of our profession and the character of our climate, so that the whole point of our clothing may not consist in strangeness of apparel, which might be offensive to persons of the world, but in decent simplicity." While most early monastic saints quoted above encouraged dirty clothes that are unwashed for the most part, St. John Cassian taught, "In no respect should clothing be self-consciously meticulous, but neither, on the other hand, should it be grimy with filth accumulated by neglect." Likewise, Elder Emilianos of Simonopetra taught that monks should have moderation in their cleanliness, avoiding the extremes of being slovenly and excessively tidy. He said, quote, "The washing of clothes reveals a person's soul, his virtue, his ego, his illnesses, his passions, everything. How much more so when the cleanliness of his clothes becomes a need, and he takes care that there be not the slightest spot on them. When he wants to keep ironing them with perfect folds, then he is not only not a monk, but he is not even a rational human being, because these things show that he squanders his efforts on things of no value. Washing clothes expresses the cleanliness of your soul, and you do it for the sake of the brotherhood, since uncleanliness creates problems for others. When Elder Amphilochius Macris of Patmos saw someone who wanted to join his monastery who lacked cleanliness, he would tell him, "You are a great ascetic. You aren't suitable for our monastery." In this way, he was forced either to leave or to conform to the demands of the brotherhood. One who is unclean amidst the clean shows his egotism and what a failure he is in his inner world. In the same spirit, Elder Ephraim taught us that we should be careful not to wear raggedly clothes in order to avoid scandalizing the contemporary Americans who do equate dingy clothes with disreputability. Elder Milianos also warned against desiring nice clothes, since this springs from our self-love. Quote, "When someone carefully selects his own cowl, his own shoes, his own clothes, this reveals that he is not just a disorderly person, but someone whom Satan is leading astray. This applies especially to nuns. People should not be able to tell her that her clothes are beautiful and nicely tailored to fit her. It is better that people call a nun immoral than to tell her that her clothes fit her perfectly. There is no worse criticism than this. When someone is immoral, he can repent and perhaps correct himself. But as far as the tremendous evil of self-love, of egotism, who can correct it? Christ is obtained by having clean, simply sewn, or patched up clothes that would fit everyone, not by having that which fits the shape of our body perfectly. Such clothes are for a girl in the world who wants to get married. But how can a nun be decked up in clothes with a collar nicely sewn and ironed?" St. Yosif Volotsky wrote, "Just as we have said concerning foods and beverages that it is good to select the simple and unexcessive and to do everything with the counsel of the spiritual superior. By the same model, having clothing that is necessary, simple, very mean, and appropriate for the place and climate, and do not by means of demonic cunning seek out the very expensive and excessive." In the same spirit, Eurondisa Macrina taught her nuns, "We must be economical with our clothing and with our shoes and socks as well. We should have only what is absolutely necessary and not fill ourselves with various things. We will patch our old clothes." St. Sebastian of Optina said, "Why did they disperse the monasteries? Because monks began to ride around on troikas and wear soft cotton fabric. But in the past, monastics wore canvas, podresniks, and cotton wool blend rasas, and labored conscientiously. Those were the true monks." These patristic exhortations for simplicity and equality in clothing may also be applied to other material items that monastics have. 25. Shoes. Several early Christian writers viewed shoes as something to be worn only when absolutely necessary. In the 2nd century, Clement of Alexandria wrote, quote, "Women ought for the most part to wear shoes, for it is not suitable for the foot to be shown naked. Besides, woman is a tender thing, easily hurt. But for a man, bare feet are quite in keeping, except when he is on military service. For being shod is near neighbor to being bound. To go with bare feet is most suitable for exercise and best adapted for health and ease, unless where necessity prevents. But if we were not on a journey and cannot endure bare feet, we may use slippers or white shoes. Dusty foots, the Attics called them on account of their bringing the feet near the dust, as I think." End of quote. In the 4th century, St. Pachomius ordered, "No one shall go to the synaxis or to the refectory with shoes on his feet." Commenting on the 4th century monks of Egypt, St. John Cassian wrote, quote, "They refuse shoes as being forbidden by gospel precept. even when bodily infirmity or a winter's morning chill or the intense midday heat demands them, and they only put sandals on their feet. They understand that this use of them, with the Lord's permission, means that if, once having been placed in this world, we cannot be utterly removed from the care, the worry of this flesh, and are unable to be completely rid of it, we should at least provide for the necessities of the body with a minimum of preoccupation and involvement. But although they legitimately use sandals, since they were conceded by the Lord's decree, they nonetheless do not allow them on their feet when they approach to celebrate or to receive the most holy mysteries, considering that they must keep literally what was said to Moses and to Joshua the son of Nun, "Undo the strap of your sandal, for the place on which you stand is holy ground." Exodus 3, verse 5, and Josiah 5:15. A footnote from John Cashin's Institutes. The editor of the English edition of the Institutes remarked, "The practice of wearing shoes or sandals when celebrating or receiving the Eucharist seems to have varied in Christian antiquity. For example, the Riha paten and the Stuma paten, both Byzantine works, and both dating from the late 6th century, show the apostles barefoot as they receive communion from the hands of Christ. On the other hand, the illuminated Rossano Gospels, another Byzantine production from roughly the same period, it depicts a similar scene in which the apostles are shod." To continue, perhaps St. John Maximovich had this principle in mind, for he always celebrated the Divine Liturgy barefoot, to the great displeasure of some people. Abba Isaiah taught, "If there's any need to go outside, that is, the monk should put on his sandals, but while he's in his cell, he should try not to wear sandals." Evidently, for monks in 4th century Byzantium were also barefoot, since this is how St. Gregory the theologian described them. And since St. John Chrysostom commented on the grief of a rich father seeing his son dressed in shabby monastic garments and barefoot. The rule for the monastery of Cumplodo forbade wearing shoes, except in winter, and the canons of Maruta allowed only sandals. Footnote, in the case of shoes, the custom to be followed is that those who wish may wear shoes in the winter from November 1st to May 1st, but in the summer months they may be protected only with sandals. From Barlow's The Fathers of the Church, the Iberian Fathers. Numerous saints from the earliest centuries until modern times chose to go barefoot. St. Joseph the Hesychist sometimes went barefoot out of poverty, or for asceticism in the snow, or just out of an apparent preference to do so. Other monastic rules, however, do allow footwear. For example, sandals are mentioned by St. Maximus the Confessor and St. Germanos of Constantinople. Shoes are mentioned by St. Basil the Great, and both shoes and boots are recommended by St. Theodore the Studite and St. Athanasius of Athos. When St. Paisios of the Holy Mountain lived in Sinai, due to walking barefoot, quote, "the soles of his feet had hardened and become like the soles of shoes." When he was asked why he walked barefoot, he replied, "The shoes we were born with never wear out. The more you use them, the stronger they become." The way the body is strengthened by walking barefoot has been explained by one researcher as follows. For more on this, see www.runbear.com/barefoot-benefits. Footnote 1409, Monastic Behavior, page 265, second edition. Quote, "By feeling the ground, the vestibular system, the balance system is triggered, stimulating new neural connections and remapping their minds for greater balance. Walking barefoot results in greater muscle strength for both balance and support. As the feet strengthen, plantar fasciitis diminishes, foot neuromas go away, bunions begin to dissipate, and other conditions such as hammer toes go away. Even the arthritic foot begins to slowly heal itself as it develops greater strength, greater flexibility, and greater blood flow. The increased circulation means less aches and pains, less varicose veins, and warmer feet and legs in the winter. Furthermore, since the sole of most shoes is much thicker at the heel than at the toe, the resulting unnatural tilt ruins our posture and strains our hamstrings, our lower back, upper back, shoulders, and neck. It also affects our gait, putting force on our hips, knees, and feet when we walk. Studies have even shown that walking barefoot, it decreases blood pressure, cortisol, stress, and the inflammation throughout the body by stimulating the many nerve endings at the bottom of the feet. End of quote from runbear.com. To continue, another benefit of being barefoot is that it electrically grounds the body. Studies have shown that this boosts immunity, improves brain activity, moderates heart rate variability, improves glucose regulation, decreases blood viscosity, helps regulate both the endocrine and nervous systems, and reduces chronic pain, cortisol, and stress. All this contributes to the pleasant feeling people have when they are barefoot. Other studies have shown that where barefoot and shod populations coexist, as in Haiti, for example, injury rates of the lower extremity are substantially higher in the shod population, and that wearing shoes increases the likelihood of ankle sprains because it either decreases one's awareness of foot position or increases the twisting torque on one's ankle during a stumble. Daniel Howell explained the mechanism for this as follows. From his book, The Barefoot Book, 50 Reasons to Kick Off Your Shoes, 2010, quote, when the shod foot lands on a rock or root, the hard sole rotates and the ankle takes the brunt of the force, causing injury. By contrast, the barefoot is excellent at deforming around such objects and conforming to the terrain, sparing the ankles from excessive twisting. Studies have demonstrated that shod runners suffer more injuries per mile than barefoot runners, and that expensive running shoes cause twice the injuries as cheap running shoes. Since odor-causing bacteria, such as Staphylococcus and Pseudomonas, and fungi, such as Tinea pedis or athlete's foot, require a dark, moist environment to survive, being barefoot eliminates foot odor, according to the American Academy of Dermatology. More seriously, the blisters and contact dermatitis caused by shoes enable those bacteria to penetrate the skin and cause infections. Howell adds, shoes not only favor the growth of pathogenic microbes, but they also prevent our exposure to beneficial good bacteria. Recent studies indicate that exposure to certain harmless soil bacteria actually elevates our mood, reduces depression, and boosts the immune system. Specifically, exposure to the soil bacterium Mycobacterium vaccae induces the release of serotonin in the brain. Elevated serotonin levels are well known for elevating your mood and warding off depression. Howell elaborates on several other physiological detrimental effects of wearing shoes. Well, most shoes also deform the foot's natural shape and act as a cast that immobilizes joints and causes muscles to atrophy. Shoes reduce the gripping and push-off functions of the toes, dramatically reduce the spring action of the arc, and reduce considerably the shock absorption function of the arc. Since a finished shoe contains literally hundreds of chemicals remaining from the manufacturing process, these chemicals can produce severe allergic reactions. The leading known allergens are potassium dichromate from chrome tanning leather, ethyl butyl thiol found in rubber, and mercaptobenzolthiol and p-tertiary butyl phenyl resin found in glues. Forgive the pronunciations. As if mere presence of these chemicals is not bad enough, the heat and the moisture inside the foot facilitates leaching of these chemicals from the shoe materials while simultaneously increasing the absorption properties of the skin. Bare feet are, of course, more vulnerable to puncture wounds, but the experience of numerous barefoot runners is that such injuries are actually rare. Footnote. The reason why puncture wounds are rare is because exposing the feet to rough surfaces makes the skin on the soles of the feet much thicker and harder without forming calluses, since calluses are the result of shear forces on the skin's surface. In my own experience, I've found that after only a couple of months of walking barefoot on slightly rough surfaces, my feet could then painlessly handle extremely rough surfaces, such as gravel with jagged edges and dirt roads strewn with pointy little rocks. Attempts to walk on such surfaces initially causes intense discomfort and occasional bleeding, but after my soles thickened, the feeling elicited by walking on such surfaces was more akin to a pleasant massage. To continue, naturally, that is, when barefoot, the body's weight is supported primarily by the head of the first metatarsal, and push-off is achieved by the great toe during walking. Constant shoe wearing physically moves the toes together, and body weight is transferred to the weaker second and third metatarsals. Push-off is achieved by the weak second and third toes by habitually shod feet. One of the immediate benefits of walking barefoot is that it puts no restrictions on the dorsalis pedis artery or other vessels and allows unrestricted blood flow. In addition, because the feet are not immobilized in a rigid shoe when walking barefoot, they experience considerable freedom of movement. The extra flexing, twisting, and muscle movements that occur when walking in feet unbound by shoes stimulates blood circulation through the lower extremities. Not only does all this flexing and twisting encourage blood flow, it also improves the flow of the interstitial fluids, that is the lymph, through the lymphatic vessels. Thus, increased mobility in the foot helps to cleanse the tissues of toxins, of dead cell debris, and microbial invaders, in addition to reducing swelling, that is, edema, in the ankles. Finally, barefoot walking restores a natural gait and allows for the full range of motion in the foot and ankle joints. These changes improve joint mobility and reduce pressure on the bones and soft structures of the forefoot and knee. Indeed, since shoe-induced changes in gait are often responsible for lower back pain and are now considered to be a major cause of knee arthritis, a condition that afflicts millions of older Americans, it stands to reason that walking barefoot should delay the onset and/or reduce the severity of these conditions. 3 out of 4 Americans will visit a podiatrist during their lifetimes, most of them because of shoe-related problems to their feet. Greater flexation at the knee and plantar flexion at the ankle are observed in barefoot runners, which also reduce the impact forces on the knee and ankle. These adjustments presumably happen to reduce plantar discomfort. It is the body's successful reading of the tactile information from the foot leading to stress-reducing modifications in gait. The cushioned outer sole, midsole, and insole of shoes severely limit the tactile information the brain receives about impact, leading to greater impact on joints from the foot to the spine. End of long quote from Howell. According to Dr. Marty Hughes, the incidence of foot problems in barefoot, minimally shod populations is somewhere around 3%, whereas the incidence of foot problems in our American society is somewhere between 70 and 80%. The problems that the barefoot, encounter are mostly of a traumatic nature, such as dropping something on an uncovered foot. Likewise, a survey in China and India of feet that have never worn shoes observed no instances among the barefoot feet were found. Of the fifth and all, that is, no instances of anchocryptiosis, hyperidiosis, bromidiosis, hallux valgus, hallux varus, bursitis at the first or fifth metaphalangical articulations. These figures prove that restrictive foot gear causes most of the ailments of the human foot. Foot gear is the greatest enemy of the human foot. To end the quote. Another study wrote, all writers who have reported their observations of barefooted people agree that the untrammeled feet of natural men are free from the disabilities commonly noted among shod people. Hallux valgus, bunions, hammer toes, and painful feet. Millions of Indians, both American and Asian, and Congoids wander their native savannas and rainforests without protection, inconvenience, or complaint. Footgear, therefore, would appear to be unnecessary. All these health benefits of being barefoot should be of no surprise. For if God made all things in wisdom, Psalm 103, verse 26, it follows that he would also design the feet of men, who is the crown of his creation, to function most effectively and efficiently in their natural state. Leonardo da Vinci, marveling at the wisdom of the foot's design, drew detailed anatomical diagrams of the bones in the human foot and declared, the human foot is a masterpiece of engineering and a work of art. One could even argue that God would not have created the soles of our feet with such a high density of nerve endings, more than 100,000 per sole, if he wanted us to deaden that sensitivity by covering them with a thick slab of leather or rubber. Although people in extreme climates have been wearing shoes for insulation for at least 5,000 years, it was not until the Dark Ages in Europe that wearing shoes began being viewed as a status symbol, and being barefoot was associated with being poor. After the Industrial Revolution, when the mass production of shoes began in the late 19th century, shoes became affordable to everyone in Western society, and everyone began wearing them to avoid being stigmatized as poor. As a result, wearing shoes became a cultural norm in Western society, and being barefoot became socially unacceptable. Since this cultural prejudice still prevails today, to avoid scandalizing people, we monastics living in Western society should take care to wear shoes or sandals when we are in public, following the example of St. John Maximovich, who put on his shoes when people ridiculed him for being barefoot. Selecting minimalist footwear can reduce the harm caused by rigid shoes with thick soles, raised heels, chemicals, and so forth. 26. Other rules of conduct. St. Pachomius taught it will not be allowed to exchange among the brothers the things that are received from the prior. The regular Orientalis quoted this rule of St. Pachomius, and then added to it, no one may accept anything from another unless the prior has given permission. Likewise, Euronda Macrina wrote to her nuns, it is forbidden to eat something or to give something to another sister without a blessing. These rules do not apply to trivial items, of course, such as pens and paper and batteries and so forth. Euronda Macrina wrote the following rule for her nuns. We should walk around the monastery humbly and decorously, with our hands crossed without rushing. This rule is similar to what St. Paisi Velichkovsky told his monks. A monk must be, in everything, a monk. They should have a meek manner of walking, with the hands folded on the chest, the head bent down, the eyes cast down toward the ground, the heart directed upward to God, and the mind, the nous, in the ceaseless prayer of Jesus, and that in everyone there should be unhypocritical love. Abba Isaiah had a slightly different approach and taught, when a monk is walking, his hands should be held firmly against his side, so that they do not move to and fro as in the case of secular people. And footnote, once when Yeranda Frem noticed a monk swinging his arms while walking, he didn't think it was a serious enough flaw to correct, but he did point out to me how inappropriate it looked. Similarly, whenever St. Sebastian of Optina saw someone walking through the church quickly and without the fear of God, or swinging his arms around, or shoving others, or even behaved that way outside in the courtyard of the monastery, he would reprimand him in front of everyone for the edification of all. He taught one should walk quietly and calmly, not taking big steps or stamping one's feet, especially in church, even when in a hurry. After all, the world watches us and takes an example from us. In the same spirit, the nuns of St. Paisios of the Holy Mountain told him, upon seeing a sister animatedly swinging her arms while she walked in the church, he reproached her and said, "Why are you moving about like that? In church, one must walk like the angels during the great entrance. Have you seen how the angels walk in the icon, the heavenly divine liturgy? That icon represents how Father Paisios wanted the sisterhood to present itself, not only in the church, but everywhere. Attire, walk, gaze, speech, everything. He wanted everything to be properly suited to the monastic, to the nun. Athonite monasteries do not have mirrors, and monastics do not look at their reflection in a window, since this encourages vainglory and self-love. St. Nicodemus wrote the following advice to the layman. There is an irrational passion and vain preoccupation with which certain sensual people have in decorating their homes with large and luxurious mirrors. I beseech you to avoid this kind of vain and condemnable pleasure. If you do have mirrors, please remove them as things altogether improper for the Christian way of life. Plato used to say that one should look into a mirror only when he happens to be angry, so that by seeing the harshness in his face and the disorderly movements of his hands and the unnatural shaking of his body, he may be ashamed of himself and despise this passion that is so irrational and so wild. If this is how he advised laymen to avoid using mirrors, one can imagine how he would have urged monastics to avoid using mirrors even more so. Abbot Daniel said, our Holy Fathers Anthony, Pachomius, Amun, Serpion, and other God-bearing fathers have decreed that no monk should strip bare without great necessity, or unless he is seriously ill. For when they wanted to cross rivers for particular needs and no ferry was available, unable to endure being naked because of the shame that they felt before the holy angels accompanying them, and the sun that shed its light on them, although there was no one to see them, they nonetheless entreated God to help them. Therefore, we monastics should be careful never to be naked when changing or washing, and should be careful with our eyes, as Abba Isaiah taught. Do not look at yourself with disrespect, that is, immodestly, while putting on your clothes. Some of the Holy Fathers were opposed not only to monks bathing, but even to washing their face with water. However, not all ancient monasteries followed this type of strictness. For example, the Typicon of the influential 11th century monastery of Evergeti stated, there should be a bath for the sick, and it should be heated. But you should live completely without bathing, for although we have built a bath in the monastery, yet it was not that you should live in an effeminate way, bathing and being in good physical condition, but that the sick should be comforted if necessary. However, we give permission for those who are healthy to have a bath 3 times during the year, but extra bathing, if necessary, should be permitted at the discretion of the superior. Leo, Bishop of Noplia, in the 12th century, encouraged more frequent bathing in the Typicon for the monastery he founded in Aria. You should bathe on every Saturday, except during Lent. St. Eustathius of Thessaloniki taught that monks need to be careful that their appearance does not scandalize laymen. Quote, these unspiritual monks are starting to wear luxurious clothes that have nothing to do with the monastic garment, while their bellies bulge so much that they can no longer carry their own weight, and they delegate their transportation to powerful mules. Those who never used to refuse to travel by foot now refuse to walk on the earth. But when a great distance must be traveled, then it is necessary to ride some animal. Riding an animal can also be necessary for the sake of propriety, when someone must make a good appearance and not be disparaged as someone boorish. These kinds of things must often be observed for the sake of foolish people who are unable to see the inner man, but judge externals. Therefore, a great schema monk should not be repulsive in his appearance, so that he is not ridiculed by simpletons. So, just as special food and baths for cleanliness and new clothes are good at times, likewise a great schema monk should use a means for transportation without overdoing it. He will do so in a reverent manner, bearing in mind him who, as it is written, rode on a colt without a saddle. Mark 11:7. In the same spirit, Elder Ephraim told us that nowadays laymen would be scandalized if we monastics smelled bad due to lack of cleanliness, and therefore we should wash regularly. He also said that we should wash ourselves carefully beforehand every time we need to see a doctor. Moreover, whenever we needed to go into town, he wanted our clothes to have a neat and clean appearance. Also, he told the fathers in the bookstore who come into direct contact with the visitors daily that they need to make a good impression on the visitors not only by their behavior, but also by their neat appearance. Several ancient monastic typica prohibit monastics from being the sponsor for weddings and baptisms, so that they will not be involved in worldly cares. Likewise, St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain wrote the following in his interpretation of Canon 4 of the Fourth Ecumenical Council. Quote, Peter the Cartoflax says that monks must not become godfathers to children being baptized, except in cases of urgent necessity. Nikephoros the Cartophylax also says that the Church mandatorily prescribes it as a law to abbots and exarchs of monasteries that the monks are not to be allowed to form relations as godfathers with the parents of children. The reason for this, according to the rule for nuns of St. Cesarius of Arles, is she who, for the love of God, has disdained the freedom to have children of her own ought not wish for nor possess this freedom belonging to others, so that without any hindrance she may give her time unceasingly to God. The compiler of the Byzantine monastic foundation documents points out, however, that although the association of monastics with laymen by serving as their godparents were regarded as improper for monks and nuns, the number of prohibitions suggests that they were not uncommon. Elder Ephraim agreed with this prohibition, although he did make an exception for nuns and allows them to become godmothers, to accommodate for their motherly instincts. Abba Isaiah advised, do not stretch your body when others are looking. If you must yawn, do not open your mouth, and this will be avoided. Do not open your mouth widely when you laugh. It is rude to do so. An alternative to this recommended by Elder Ephraim is to make the sign of the cross over our mouth when yawning or when laughing. The way monks should sleep was described in the following rule written on the bronze tablet given by an angel to St. Pachomius. Quote, let them sleep not lying down, but let them make reclining chairs of masonry and sleep sitting on these chairs after covering them with their blankets. At night let them wear linen tunics and be belted. St. John Chrysostom mentioned about monks in the 4th century. There are none sleeping naked. St. Benedict taught his monks, let them sleep clothed and girded with cinctures or cords, that they may be always ready. The rule of the master added to this. The brothers must sleep clothed and girded, because a brother is not allowed to touch his naked members, for from this impure desires are introduced into the mind. When he touches his naked member, he is straightway titillated by the heart's desire for women, and as a result his members are defiled during sleep. Likewise, St. Donatus of Bescanacon wrote in his rule for nuns, they should sleep clothed, their girdles bound with all gravity and modesty and always ready for divine service. The ancient Syriac rules attributed to Ephraim state, when you are walking on the street, dignify your steps and discipline your look and control your countenance, and do not eat anything on the street, in order that the discipleship of monasticism will not be despised. Similarly, in the Ordo Monastery, the first monastic rule in Latin, written in the 4th century, it says, no one must eat or drink outside the monastery without permission, for this is contrary to the monastery's discipline. Likewise, Yerunda Ephraim did not want his monks stopping at restaurants while doing errands in town, although he did allow us to bring food and drink with us when necessary. St. Pachomius wrote in his monastic precepts, No one may clasp the hand or anything else of his companion, but whether you are sitting or standing or walking, you should leave a forearm space between you and him. Likewise, St. Donatus of Bescanacon wrote in his Rules for Nuns, "It is forbidden that any take the hand of another for affection, whether they stand or walk around or sit together. She who does will be reproved with 12 blows." The Typicon for the holy monastery known as Tragos, written by Emperor John Stamikis, states, "During the period of Holy Lent, all the solitary ascetics and those living in community should spend the time in silence. They should not visit one another except for good reason, an emergency, or to seek treatment for evil and shameful thoughts." In the same spirit, Elder Ephraim also taught us that Great Lent is a time for more prayer and silence. The Tragos also states, "Regarding unknown priests coming here, we must insist that they do not have authority, either privately or publicly, to presume to celebrate the Divine Liturgy, unless they have an official letter from their bishops or some solid testimony in their favor." The rule of Paul and Stephen recommended having a lost and found, so that the monks could find their missing items more easily. Quote, "If anyone finds anything whatever which another brother has lost, whether in a cell or outside, he should not keep it in his possession for even one day, and if possible, not even for 1 hour. Rather, he should put whatever he has found in the designated place. Then the one who has lost it may look for it in that place, and will not need to endure the uncertainty and the work of going from person to look for it." St. Athanasius of Athos had a bronze hook on the door of the nave of the church where lost items would be hung. End of chapter 5 on monastic behavior.